Live with Eric and Geoff. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you guys today? Good?
Shell-shocked.
Yeah. That was about to do that for you.
I mean, to be honest, it's unbelievable. Every time you think that, you've seen it, you kind of get blown out of the water. It's been a big love fest today. But what would you like to talk about?
Honestly, I didn't think I would even get on. I thought the show was run for an hour and that was it. So yeah, I'm surprised I even had a chance to talk to you guys today.
Oh, all of the people who are waiting on the line, we will talk to, and we're really, really happy. Thank you for staying on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I always enjoy listening to you guys. If anything.
Yay! So what's up?
But yeah, so I guess the question I have is, it's not something new. I think probably everybody who's watched the show or shows similar or just interested in these topics altogether already know about it. But the concept of objective morality, I guess I can only ask you and Geoff personally. But do you believe there is such a thing as objective morality?
No. But
just all.
Well, is it all relative? Oh, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
I actually kind of interrupted you. I didn't mean to.
No, it's all good, man. Mine's a little nuanced. Do you got one?
I was just going to say, part of my issue is definitional, and frankly, my thinking on this has very much piggybacked on Matt Delahunty's talks and whatnot. That once the objective, and he's sitting right out there, and I'm going to butcher his point of view inevitably. But when it comes to objective morality, once you have decided subjectively what moral is, then there is an objective way of achieving whatever you've defined moral to be. But it's up to each of us to kind of decide what we think is the moral ideal and what makes an act moral. Sure. So it's subjective. It's not relative. And there are objective aspects to it. It's wibbly wobbly, timey wimey stuff.
And that's a good conversation.
And I'd actually like to piggyback on that, right? Because up until that point, I agree. The only things that I would add to it is that we're able to do that when we have all of the information, right? We're able to make an is assessment, right? We can be armchair quarterbacks after the fact and go, these are all of the potential things that you could have done in that situation. This was the optimal thing to do.
Sure.
That would be the most moral thing to do. But because we can't have that proscriptively because we don't have all of the information all of the time, we have to rely on, these rules of thumb, to determine what is the best course of action. And I think we as a society have made a whole lot of mistakes doing that, but we learn from our lessons, right? And if you want to go even further, right? I know a lot of people talk about Kant. And Kant, I feel there are some parts that are worth picking up, right? Kant ultimately said that, everybody, that there are people who, there are things you act on, and then there are things that have this intrinsic value. And we assign that value, and then he points to a God and said, God assigns that value. But we don't need that God piece. Really, we are assigning value to things, and that's okay. It's icky. It feels bad. I wish, that there was not a wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey answer. But in the end, I think it's the honest one that we can give. Specifically, okay, so, Eric and Geoff.
Just so I'm clear, I just want to just make sure I'm understanding.
Sure.
Basically, the basic answer to the question is no. There is no objective morality. It doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's just so. Again, if you can make the distinction, right? I think you can have something objectively moral if you have all of the information around it, and so you could armchair quarterback objective morality. But in the proscriptive sense, right? The ought. I don't agree that you can have an objective. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, what you're saying makes sense. Absolutely. Like, basically it's like, you have to look at, case by case and say, was that moral or was that immoral? Is that kind of essentially what you're saying?
Yeah.
And it's hard to know in the moment.
Yeah, and it can change over time. What if we're basing our judgments off of something that is actually really immoral, and in 100 years, our great-great-grandchildren or whatever look back and go, man, they didn't get it right. Mm-hmm. The only thing that I can hope is that they've gotten closer and made a better world, and that's why they're looking at us with disdain, because they are that much better than us. Mm-hmm.
And then 100 years after that, what if that generation is saying, no, they got it wrong, and the other one had it right to begin with? So it kind of seems like it's a dead end, and there really is no such thing as, right or wrong.
We do the best that we can. And there is a right or wrong if you're setting it on human well-being, right? So if you're setting it on human well-being, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, just because there's, not an objective, there is no right or wrong. Because that's not true at all, right? The whole example that we gave you is one of value judgments that we place depending on those situations. At no point did we say, it's all bullshit, so forget it, everybody do whatever you want. Like, that's not the case. I just want to make sure that that's not mischaracterized.
Mm-hmm.
Also,
so essentially, there's no absolute morals. Then, is that right?
Maybe, but
so maybe you're saying maybe there is, maybe there isn't.
Well, if there is, I don't know how I can tell what those absolute morals are. I hope that we're living our lives as morally as we can. And if we're not, I hope that we get better at it. But that kind of takes you back to that whole, the issue with the scientific method is you're always testing whether or not it's wrong, right? And if you can't prove it wrong up until, a certain degree, people will take that as what it is. But you're always working in that other process to prove a thing wrong. We actually don't have the way to prove a thing absolutely right. And because of that, we're always going to be testing. We're always going to be looking, even if we have stumbled on the right answer. It's that drive. And I actually kind of like that. It makes the world interesting.
So, can the scientific method really determine morality?
I just use that as an example to kind of show that whole. Is there absolute morality? If there was, I don't think I would be able to know. That's uncomfortable.
And it depends on, you could say, an action which increases the ability of more life to thrive is morally superior to an action which does not allow as much life to thrive. Whether or not organisms are thriving is entirely studyable by science. So if that's what you define as the moral act, then you can absolutely study it through the scientific method.
Well, I'm glad you ended with if that's how you define it, because I actually had a question when you said that thriving is like a value of what we would consider to be moral. But is it objectively true that thriving is a good thing?
Well,
no, because
again, that's the objective word. That's kind of the best we got, man. I really don't know what to say from there. I know that if you were to say, therefore it's not true, it'd just be an appeal to consequent. We're
No,
stuck
no,
in
no.
this.
I'm not saying that. Basically, what I'm struggling with is I want to know if objective morality is true or exists or not. And I'm sure you guys probably want to know the same thing. But if the answer is no, there's no objective moral values, then all you're left with is subjective independent opinions of the individual.
Well, let's say that's the case. Is there any reason to think that isn't? Well, is there any reason to think that isn't the case?
There could be good reasons to believe that. And if that's true, that there's no such thing as right or wrong.
We didn't say that. Hold on.
No,
That's
no.
mischaracterized. Right. We never said there's no such thing as right or wrong, and we never said it's just
No.
your opinion.
I stopped myself to correct myself.
Okay.
I didn't mean to do that.
Right.
Good or bad, moral, immoral, I guess.
Well, I would say that there are things that are immoral, yes, and there are things that are bad, yes. Again, we're not saying we don't think that there are things
we all know there's things that are like good or bad, like celebrating your son's birthday is good. I would think that's good. Rape is obviously bad.
Yeah.
And I don't think many people disagree with those two statements. But
okay.
If subjective morality is the only morality that exists, if I'm wrong, please explain to me why I'm wrong. If subjective morality is all that exists, how can it be any more than just an opinion or, a group of opinions, a society's opinion?
Sure.
Well,
so here's the thing. If this society is all we have, then that's all we have. We rely on that. And also we're built in. There are a lot of mechanisms in our own brains biologically that lend toward moral and ethical behavior, right? And because of that, as being a social species, that's what gets us there. By the way, two quick things. I just, before I forget, number one, there is not going to be a Patreon after show as a thank you to all of the donors. And I just want to include Brandon R. and Neil Bradley, who each donated $500. Instead of a Patreon section after the show, we're going to keep this open for everyone to be able to listen to. We are going to run live until we finish our calls today. Thank you so much. So sorry about that. Going back to it, Jonathan, if that's all we have, the other thing, sorry, Matt Dillahunty is sitting in the front row disagreeing with me a lot. He says, call him. He wants to talk to you on the Atheist Experience. But as long as you're talking to the two of us, I mean, I don't know what to say, man. It's the best that I've got. And the funny thing is it's an observation after the fact. I know that I've behaved in a moral way before I came to understand why I behave in a moral way. And so this is the best approximation that I have. And if I'm wrong, I'd love to be, just let me know because I want to know what's true.
And I wanted to add that, believing that it's dictated by a higher power doesn't fix the problem. It just removes it one step.
No, I absolutely agree with that.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that I got that point on the record.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. It's just something that I struggle with when I think about it. Because it just, again, well, let me ask you this. Is it true that either objective morality exists or if it does, objective morality, if it does not exist, only leaves subjective morality. Is that true?
Well, that's kind of where I drew that line, right? After the fact, if you can pull all of the information around a thing, you can come to an objective conclusion, right? If you were to, I don't know, somebody saves a baby from a burning building, right? And you look at that after there are tons and tons of ways to be able to determine, that was objectively a moral thing to do. But I guess the other side of it, though, I got to ask you, John. John or Jonathan?
Either one's fine.
Okay. I'm going to call you John because that's two people I adore are named John. So I'm going to call you John. So, John.
Now it's 3.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. So, John, my brother and John Tab, absolutely adore them. Now, you too. I like it. John, I have here that you're a Christian or
yes, that's right.
a theist. The proposition that there is an objective morality in God, right? Would that be something that you would agree with, that God creates objective morality?
Creates, no.
Okay.
I wouldn't agree with that. Because if God said, rape was objectively moral, I would not believe that. So
really,
no.
But
I think
okay.
so. I guess the way that I have this rationale in my mind on objective morality through God is the only way I can make sense of it. Because I've been asked a question from a philosophy teacher, actually. Is something moral because God says so?
Euthyphro.
Or does God say something is moral because it is moral? Something to that effect.
Yeah, that's the Euthyphro dilemma. That's a fantastic exercise to go through. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I thought about the question, and to me, it seemed like a false dichotomy. Okay. That here's the only two possible answers, and it has to be one of them. But because I couldn't say one or the other, because they both lead to, I guess, other questions about God or, God's character and stuff that don't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only rational way I can think about it is morality is objective because God himself is the epitome of what is moral.
Okay, so question for you.
God doesn't call something moral. He doesn't create an event and say this is moral because I say so, and if I say so, that's what makes it moral. It's because God is, objectively good, or the transcendent goodness of all that can be good. That I believe that's how objective morality can exist.
So good exists outside of God, and God can't change what's good and what's not.
Well, God is the epitome of goodness.
Okay.
So I guess
right,
the question is, could you anthropomorphize other things into being actual? I know Richard Dawkins said smelly, right? The idea that something can be more or less smelly,
mm-hmm.
and so that means there must be a thing that is objectively the most smelly, and I call that thing God. Right.
Interesting.
That what they did was take a quality and then anthropomorphized it into a person and then insisted that person exists. And I just don't have any way to be shown that you can anthropomorphize a concept like that and then say that thing exists in the real world. You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah. And honestly, I absolutely agree with that. If I'm being perfectly honest with myself, then yeah, I have to say that's true. That's a valid statement, valid argument. Like I said, in the only rationale that I can come to, if I believe that objective morality does exist, that it exists through God's perfect morality in His own character, His own being.
I feel
I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying this is why I'm Christian. I'm just saying when I think about this
sure.
thing,
Yeah.
It's the only rational way I can, kind of, I guess, explain it to myself.
I feel like using the tools that you're using, that wouldn't feel to me like a very satisfactory answer. It would feel rather manufactured,
Mm-hmm.
And I would again say we're sitting here on the other side telling you, hey, we could absolutely be wrong too, and it's uncomfortable, and it's a weird, uncomfortable place to sit and talk about. That said, it's kind of the best we got. I'm really interested if you make any other progress on this or you consider this. I'm really interested to find out if you still consider that a sufficient answer, because I would imagine that just wouldn't ring as true, because you obviously know that baked into the answer you're given is not a very sturdy response. It just doesn't feel like it would hold weight based on what you said.
Mm-hmm.
That's just
yeah, like it's really the only thing that I've thought about that makes sense, even if it's not like this is the greatest argument for objective morality or God or anything like that. It's just I do believe that objective morals exist. I believe that right and wrong exists, independent of any of our feelings or opinions or anything. I don't think there's anybody in the world, any sensible person in the world, who would say that raping a child is not objectively immoral. That's not anyone's matter of opinion. We all know that raping a child is probably one of the most evil, immoral things a human being can do to another human being.
Yeah, we agree.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think
to me is not something that is subjective. I don't see how that can be. My opinion says that, so therefore that's why it's true.
Because it's not just based on opinion. Again.
Well, I mean, isn't that what subjective is, though?
No, that is if you limit yourself to being the only one on the planet, John. We live in a society. We live with other people, and we need to be able to interact in that world. Really quickly, we lost one of our theist callers. I'm really bummed. That might be them calling in on the other line. Let's find out. Let's hope. Fingers crossed. That said, I completely lost my place. Darn it.
Oh.
You said that it would only be true if I was the only person on the planet.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, we live in a society, right? We're social creatures, and because of that, there are a whole lot of things that go into it. It's not just one person's feelings that make something moral or immoral, right? You live in that world with other people, and that makes all the difference. I mean...
But why should that matter? Like, not being a cynic, obviously, but no. I mean, why should that matter?
Well, it matters because if you rape a child, you're going to go to prison, right? You're also going to be excluded from society, right? There are consequences.
Specifically from a moral standpoint.
Oh,
so this is probably a bad hypothetical. I don't really like to jump into hypotheticals or anything because they can get pretty ridiculous. But here's a question I asked myself, and I don't even have an answer for it. I'm just kind of sharing it with you, and maybe you have some thoughts on it. I have a son. He's about to be 2 years old. I love him more than anything in the world. He's my whole life. If it came to some point in my life where he and I were starving, if my son was starving and there was nothing I could do except for steal from another family who was starving and they happened to have food.
Jonathan as Jean Valjean.
Give it to my son because I care more about him,
Yeah.
Did I make an immoral decision? I don't know what the answer is.
Doesn't that feel weird? It feels real weird. But
what does?
The hypothetical that you just gave, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I think of Jean Valjean and Les Mis, I think Jean did the right thing. But also if there's a time of crisis and there's not enough, if there's a scarcity that requires, that there's something like that happens, I think there's a degree of empathy there. There are stories, let's say, I read a story of a hospital, and I actually hope this is not true, but I sadly think that it is, that there was a hospital that was in Katrina, I think, right? The floodwaters were coming, and they could only get so many people out, and they could not get everyone out. And so I think it was more than one person, but it might have been one person, went to the wards full of people who were terminal and killed them. Injected them with something that killed them because they thought there's no way we're all going to survive this. This is the best thing to do, right? And tragically, after that happened, they were rescued. And that person had to live with that.
Yeah.
Do I think that person was acting in a way that was malicious? I don't think so. But also what they did was terrible. It's just another one of those things that kind of illustrates that we live in a world that has a whole lot of wibbly wobbly time. Is that what you said?
That's
right?
what I said, yeah.
Wibbly wobbly stuff. And we're just inhabiting it.
You reference Les Mis, I reference Doctor Who. It's fine.
Yeah.
So I absolutely don't want to put words in your mouth or anything, Eric. So if I'm misconstruing the story you just told, and then the opinion you had on it, absolutely stop me dead in my tracks. Because what I heard was that when you said, "Did he do something wrong?" I don't think so. It sounds to me like you were saying that he didn't murder somebody else to save himself, and I don't think he did anything wrong.
No. That's a really good question. I'm glad you're giving me the chance to reply.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think that murdering someone to save yourself is the only way that something can be justifiable, right? I used to own Newfoundland dogs, and my last dog, Zoe, she had cancer and tumors throughout her entire body, and she was in extraordinary pain. And so the choice was to give her a few more days where either she'd be knocked out from medications to prevent the pain, or to, let her suffer until she died, or to give her a death with dignity, right? And to, in that spirit of empathy, put her down so she didn't have to suffer, right? I can't tell you what was in the mind of that person, but when I read it, that was the thought that I had.
Mm.
So, I mean, again, we can come to different conclusions on it, but it's just one of those things. It's one of those really weird, fucked up things.
And if the day
and
after...
that's why I'm so confused on, if there's no God and that's the truth, then, I want to know that. If there is no objective morality, I want to know that too. But I can't think of, and this is probably an argument from ignorance, but I can't think of any other reason that objective morality can exist other than, the innate feeling of, I believe I know what's right and wrong, and independent of what everybody else thinks. I can't explain why I know that hurting people is wrong, stealing from people is wrong, killing people is wrong. I don't know how I know that. You know what I'm saying?
Evolutionary biology.
I say it like that. But I believe it's true, and I think that. It seems kind of common sense that everybody knows that that's true. Everybody knows that raping a child is immoral. So, how do we know this?
Because we evolved to be social animals. And the only way for social animals to survive, the way that social animals like us have found to survive is to work together. And so certain actions make that impossible, and therefore those individual members of the species who did not have that sense often get weeded out.
And focusing on rape.
But I'm not an evolutionary biologist.
No.
I'm just, there's a reason why, a scientific reason why you might have that sense.
Well, and I actually want to piggyback on that. That yes, empathy, right, as found in us biologically, I think would play an incredibly large part. But at the same time, I think that this is a great example of how society has gotten so much better than the way it was before, right? There are examples in a lot of holy texts, including in the Bible, that says, slay the men and the women who've known men, but keep the virgins for yourself, right? And that is not just a biblical, a Christian Bible thing. There are different places that endorse rape, when you go far back, and there are still places that would be okay with rape around the world. I think this is a chance that we've had as people
if
to.
somebody's okay with rape. I mean, obviously, a rapist is okay with rape, but I think he still knows it's wrong.
But actually, I don't know, man. I hope so.
Well, I mean, if he's the one being raped, he probably knows that it's wrong. He does, just because he's raping someone doesn't mean he doesn't know it. When he becomes the victim, he immediately knows it's wrong.
I guess I've just seen enough videos of people who felt justified in the atrocities that they've committed, and I've also seen societies that I cannot live in a world where there are that many people who are okay with rape, but have reasoned their way through it for one reason or another. But again, this is just one of those things that I think I'm so glad I live in 2018, man, because I live in a better world than I would have if I had been, if I lived 1,000 years ago, 200 years ago, 50 years ago. My goodness, I am not a white man. That civil rights, oh my goodness. Yeah. So it takes a lot. I'm proud of where we've gotten.
I guess I just, as far as what we've discussed, I still don't have any, what's the best way to put it? I haven't gotten anything out of your guys' responses, and obviously, this is just what you guys know and what you guys believe in and how you got there and stuff. But it seems like, again, the only morality that exists is subjective morality, and if subjective morality is all that exists, it's just a matter of our opinions.
Again, no.
Matt
just did an impression of Khan. Again, that throws the baby out with the bathwater. Do you understand why that throws the baby out with the bathwater? Okay, because if we're able to make determinations of what is more or less moral, if we're able to go, this was objectively the best way to go, which I said from the start, then obviously it's not just like my opinion, right? Because we can share that with other people. If I were to sit down with Geoff and we were to take a look at all of these different scenarios and talk about it, and we could come to an agreement probably about what was the most moral thing to do in that situation. You don't throw out morality because you can't have an objective basis for it. That is a baseless assertion.
Oh, that's not at all what I said.
Oh, please.
I'm agreeing that morality exists. I'm just saying, if it's subjective, how is it any more than opinion?
Because
if there's no standard outside of the standard that we create, which is biased, how is that any more than just our opinion?
Because
even if we say that it's morally good because humanity thrives or it continues on generations at a time, aren't we just pushing the question back? What makes humanity's survival objectively good? Why does that matter? We're creating the standard ourselves, which means it's our bias, which comes down to our opinions, doesn't it?
I mean, we can only work from our own perspective. It's the fact that it's not simply my opinion when we can discuss an issue and arrive at an answer that is verifiable and that we can all agree on.
So if we agree on it, does that make it morally right?
No, we can all agree and be wrong. But the verifiable part is is to me at least the crux of it.
Yeah, I guess what I'm wondering is how come that isn't sufficient? I feel like you made an assertion there, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but you said that if there is no objective morality outside of what we create, then it's just our opinions. Feels like an appeal to consequence, doesn't it? I mean,
if I did use the word "what we create," I didn't mean to.
Oh, okay.
I guess what I'm, even if it's like when I say our opinion or like my opinion, as a society's opinion as a whole, whatever conclusion we come to on what is what is moral, what is not moral. It's just like I believe Geoff said a second ago, we could be wrong. Is there? I don't see how there is such thing as moral or immoral any more than just the opinions that we come up with, whether in a group or society or individually. That doesn't somehow come down to this was a matter of our opinions based on whatever information, our beliefs, what's better for society, humanity's progression, survival, stuff like this. Because to me, the next question is, okay, well, why is that ultimately good? Who decides that that's good? What are we using to make that belief?
Well, I guess I feel like I've tried to answer it to the best of my ability, and I'm sad that I don't feel like I've done a good job of summing it up. I think Matt might have he's much more experienced. But what I would say is, because it feels bad, or because it doesn't feel like enough, I guess the question is, if that was the case, right? If you were to follow that, if that was the case, then how would that make it wrong? How would that make it incorrect if that was the case? Like, I guess I just don't know how you're moving from it can't be true because of what you just said, and it not being
I'm
appeal to
absolutely.
consequent.
No, absolutely. I'm not saying it can't be true. It absolutely could be true. I just don't know how to get there. I don't know how we can get to knowing that it's true.
I think you can't know anything, right? I think that.
And you know that.
Oh, hey. No, I describe it in terms of capital T truth and lowercase t truth, right? We're going to move as best we can toward what is true, and we're going to investigate the world around us to come up with what we know about it, right? And we're always going to strive for that capital T truth. We're always going to work toward it, but we're never really going to know when we hit on it. The best we can hope for is to get close to it, right? It's reaching for something that we're never going to be sure that we can attain, right? That's why if somebody says, Eric, do you accept something as true? In my mind, I'm assigning a value to it, right? And that truth value is based on the tools that I have, the epistemological tools that I have, how I understand what is true or not true. And so if I believe that something is, if I think that something is 90% likely, and it is that Geoff had eggs this morning, I mean, I have absolutely no problem saying, okay, Geoff had eggs this morning. It just, that's how those things influence the way that I behave. It's in likelihoods, it's in percentages, right? And so, I mean, it's a paradox, right? Mm-hmm. How can we know? How can we get to capital T truth? I think that in practice, we can't wait to act until we have capital T truth, especially if we can never get to it. And so if that's the case, and to the best of my knowledge that is the case, then we have to act in this world in the meantime. And sometimes that means that we have to learn from our mistakes, and hopefully we learn from others' mistakes, right? It's just that.
Yeah, I do understand. So when I keep mentioning like that, it seems to me, and it's not a truth claim, it just seems to me that subjective comes down to a matter of opinion. And you disagreed with that earlier, if I'm not mistaken. Did you?
I'm sorry. I just somebody the live chat is talking about well-being, and I just wanted to. Sorry, it kind of distracted me, but well-being has a lot to do with it, and I if I didn't bring that up enough, I apologize. But could you say that again? I got distracted.
Oh yeah, no problem. I keep coming down to like when I come back to subjective morality, that all comes down to a matter of opinion. And if I'm not mistaken, you disagreed with that. Is that right?
Well, if you're saying then it's all a matter of opinion, what that is communicating to me is there's a lot of baggage behind that I would disagree with, right? And the baggage would be if it's just your opinion, right, then it wouldn't matter from one person to the next. You know, oh, this person thinks rape is wrong. This person thinks rape is right. And so it doesn't matter. But what I'm saying is we're acting in the aggregate, you know, and our behavior is dependent on the society that we're in, right? And so if somebody is, let's say, a sociopath, right, and they don't have that same empathy that other people have, and they act in a way that is against the society that they're in, we're going to remove that person from society. And we can actually determine that that person has made immoral actions if they take immoral actions. There are people who are sociopaths that are upstanding members of society, right? Because they realize that they still need to behave by those rules, even if they don't completely understand why. But in every single part of that, it's just your opinion feels like it throws away what is important about it, and that is that we live in this world together. Does that help? Does that kind of help illustrate why I think that saying it's just your opinion is not a good, because there's just so much to it. There's so much more to it.
Well, I understand that there's you know, negative connotations to saying it's just my opinion or your opinion or our opinion. But whether or not that statement alone is true or false is not, you know, is not dependent on the specifics, you know.
And
so basically, if I were to say,
I just want to jump in real quick because it seems like you're equating subjective with opinion, and those two aren't the same thing. I can, you know, my subjective experience of an event is my own, but it's not my opinion. It is factually how I perceived an event.
That was actually because it seemed like if I keep coming down to, you know, subjective is a matter of opinion. That was something I was going to ask is, you know, how are we defining subjective? And maybe my problem in understanding is because I don't have the same idea of as subjective, what that means, as how you guys are trying to explain it to me. So what does subjective mean to you guys in the specific like conversation of morality?
Well, I'm defining it within the specific context of this conversation. I'm not sure. I'd have to give it more thought than probably we have time for on the show.
Yeah.
But for at least broadly, subjective as opposed to objective is involves looking at it from, you know, within my perspective with my you know, lived experience and the you know, responses and things that I bring to a situation and the frame of reference in which I examine things. And so what I personally subjectively may find to be important to remember about an event, I'll keep using that, is my perception of the event, whereas objective means, you know, stepping outside and, you know, looking at you know, a videotape of an event outside of any person's lived experience.
I'd like to jump in.
Sure.
That was a really honest, like, open, definition. I think mine is probably overly simplistic now, but
we could have gone to Google and gotten a definition.
but that would be, the Google's definition. That wouldn't be how we're thinking about and interacting with it. And
in
so
this conversation.
Yeah, I think that subjective has a lot more to do with flavor of ice cream, right? I think that if you're talking about something subjective versus objective, objective things can be independently verified. Subjective things are related only to the individual. And if you're saying that everything is subjective, to me, the way that shapes things is that would mean that everything is only related to each individual and their own individual tastes. And I think that there are things that are objective, and there are things that we can determine objectively. And I mean, there is an entire form of logic around that, by definition, things being true, and then being able to determine what is true and not true using logic. And so I think that when you're talking about morality, if there was one person on Earth, right, and they did not need to interact with other living things, then I would grant to you that it's all just subjective because it's up to the taste of that one person left. But because we operate in a society with other people, that the context of that means that you can no longer make a subjective moral opinion that way. It's at the will of the society that you're in, right? You don't get to make up your own morals when you live in a world with other people in it. You have to work together. That's the best I can do to describe that.
Yeah. And I do appreciate your guys', individual thoughts on this and stuff like that. It does mean a lot to me. I haven't gotten to where I feel like I understand why it's not a matter of opinion. Especially when you just said, if it was one person, it'd be like, no, subjective morality would be only objective. I'm not sure I agree with that, actually. But introducing the fact that there's other people now in society and we all come to an agreement on what's moral, or what it's still moving it from it's my opinion to now it's all of our opinions that happen to be mutual.
Well, I feel like that's how humans have interacted with morality as long as there's been societies. To the best of my knowledge and the best of my understanding.
I hate to say this because it's like, I've heard it before and I hate to say it, but it's like jumped in my mind, that's what the Nazis thought.
Yeah.
We don't think that they were right.
Well, and I hope that by learning from really terrible reasoning and by learning and praising the worth and value of other human beings, we're never going to get there again. And in that way, I think that we're creating a more moral world. But with that, Jonathan, we've been in this call for a long time. We've got some other callers that we want to get to. Unless, Geoff, you had...
No, I was just going to say, I wish he'd called while we were doing Atheist Experience and Matt was here. And because
Matt still wants to talk to him.
Well, I know.
So call back in.